I want to talk about The Walking Dead, not to review it, not because I have opinions about the writing, though I do. I want to talk about it because collapse has a psychology, a specific, documented, repeatable pattern of how people think and decide and fall apart when the world stops working. And The Walking Dead has spent 11 seasons showing millions of people a version of that psychology that is wrong in ways that will get you killed. I want to talk about it because more people have formed their ideas about what collapse survival looks like from watching that show than from any other single source. And a significant number of those ideas will get you killed. Not by zombies. The zombies are honestly the least interesting part of this conversation. I want to talk about what the show gets wrong about human psychology. Specifically, the decisions people make when the world has fallen apart and the pressure is real and the stakes are permanent. The reason I am qualified to have this conversation is not that I have seen every episode, though I have opinions. The reason is that I watched actual collapse psychology play out in real time, on real people, including myself, and I can tell you exactly where the show's version and the real version part ways. 5 mistakes. 5 things the show presents as survival strategy that the research and personal observation identifies as the thing most likely to end you. By the end of this video, you will be able to watch any collapse scenario, fictional or otherwise, and spot these patterns before they complete. That is the goal. Let's go. The show loves Rick Grimes. I understand why. He is decisive, he's willing to do things other people aren't, he moves fast when other people freeze. These are, in the right doses, real survival advantages. But The Walking Dead runs on a model where every critical decision flows through one person. When Rick is not there, the group falls apart. When Rick is wrong, the group follows him off the cliff. When Rick breaks down, and he breaks down several times, which is realistic, there is no structure to hold the group together while he does it. The research on this is very clear. Groups that survive crisis over the long term do not run on single leader authority. They run on what researchers call distributed leadership. Different people holding different types of authority depending on what the situation requires. One person might be best at tactical decisions under immediate threat. A different person might be better at resource allocation. A third might be the one people turn to for morale and cohesion. When you concentrate all of that in one person, you create a single point of failure. If that person goes down, physically, mentally, emotionally, the group has no fallback. The Walking Dead accidentally documents this problem extremely well. Every time Rick is compromised, watch what happens to the group. The show treats it as drama. It is also textbook organizational psychology. The other thing that single leader structures do is make good information hard to move. When one person has final authority on everything, other people stop bringing problems forward because they have learned that their input does not change the outcome. You end up with a leader who thinks they have full information and a group that has quietly stopped sharing it. That gap is where catastrophic decisions live. The show actually tries to address this once. After the prison is established, Rick steps back from leadership and a council is formed. Herschel, Daryl, Glenn, Carol, Michonne. Shared decisions, distributed authority. It is, for a brief window, the most functional the group has ever been. Then a crisis hits. Rick steps back in, the council stops functioning, and single leader authority reasserts itself. The show frames this as Rick doing what has to be done. The research would frame it differently, as a group reverting to a familiar but fragile structure the moment the pressure increased, which is exactly when you most need the more resilient one. Distributed leadership is harder to build and harder to maintain than following one strong person. It requires the group to have agreed on who holds which kind of authority before anyone needs to use it. That conversation is uncomfortable, and it has to happen when things are calm. Most groups never have it. The ones that do are the ones still functioning 6 months later. This is the moral framework the show builds its first few seasons around, and it comes from a real and understandable instinct, the desire to hold on to who you were before, to not become the kind of person the new world seems to require. I have genuine sympathy for that instinct. I also watched it kill people. Here is the psychological reality. When a group is under existential threat, it needs to be able to make decisions about outsiders very quickly, with very limited information. The Walking Dead consistently portrays the group's reluctance to do this as a moral strength. Sometimes it is. More often, it is what researchers call an in-group bias failure, the inability to accurately assess threat from outside the group because the assessment is being filtered through a moral rule rather than actual evidence. Every major antagonist in the show, the governor, Negan, the claimers, Terminus, collapse survives as long as they do, partly because Rick's group is slow to act on clear warning signs. Not because the characters are stupid, because the moral framework of "we don't do that" creates a genuine cognitive delay between seeing a threat and authorizing a response to it. There is a version of this moral framework that actually works in survival conditions. Researchers who study long-term community resilience after collapse events find that the groups which survive best have clear, agreed-upon rules about outsiders that are not based on optimism or wishful thinking. The rules are based on specific, observable behaviors. Not "we assume good faith," but "we watch for these specific signs and we respond when we see them." The difference between a moral framework and a behavioral one sounds philosophical. In a collapse scenario, it is the difference between a group that adapts and a group that gets determinist. There is a real historical parallel worth mentioning here. After the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, relief camps were set up across the city to house the displaced population. The camps that developed clear, specific behavioral rules for new arrivals. This is what you do, this is what gets you removed. These rules apply to everyone equally, maintained order and cohesion for months. The camps that operated on general goodwill and the assumption that people would do the right thing experienced conflict, theft, and breakdown within weeks. The people in both types of camp were not fundamentally different. The structure was different. Good intentions are not a system. Specific rules are a system. The show's group has good intentions. It almost never has a system. The Walking Dead is built on emotional stakes. Characters make decisions based on love, grief, loyalty, guilt, and revenge. This is good television. It is also a very precise map of how groups fall apart in real collapse scenarios. Let me be specific. There is a consistent pattern in the show where a character makes a tactical decision: where to go, whether to fight, who to trust, what to risk, not based on the best available information, but based on their emotional state in that moment. The decision to go back for Sophia, the decisions made after Lori dies, the decisions made after Herschel dies, after Glenn, after Carl. Every one of these moments is written and performed with real emotional power, and every one of them illustrates something researchers call grief-driven decision bias, the documented tendency to make high-risk, low-return decisions in the period immediately following a significant loss. The research on this comes largely from combat psychology. After a unit loses a member, the risk tolerance of the remaining members increases significantly, not because the tactical situation has improved, but because grief and anger are raising their willingness to take on risk. This feels like strength. It is actually vulnerability. The decisions made in that window are statistically worse than decisions made either before the loss or well after it. The practical implication is this: if your group has just lost someone, that is the worst possible time to make a strategic decision. Not because you are not allowed to feel things, because your threat assessment is genuinely compromised and you may not know it. The part of your brain running the calculation has changed its inputs without telling you. The Walking Dead treats grief-driven decisions as the price of caring about people. That is true as far as it goes. What it does not address is that the price can be paid by everyone in the group, not just the person who is grieving. When Rick makes a bad decision because he is in pain, it is not only Rick who lives with the outcome. There is a practical tool from military and emergency services psychology that addresses this directly. It is sometimes called the 24-hour rule. Major strategic decisions are not made within 24 hours of a significant loss unless the situation is immediately life-threatening. Not because the person is incapable of functioning, because the research shows that the specific cognitive systems involved in threat assessment and risk calculation are measurably affected in that window, and 24 hours allows the most acute phase to pass. This is not a rule about suppressing emotion. It is a rule about timing. You are allowed to feel everything you are feeling. You are just not allowed to make a decision that affects the whole group from inside it without a waiting period, because the group cannot afford the cost of your worst hour. The show never establishes anything like this. There is no structure for absorbing loss before acting on it. Every death lands directly into the next decision. That is realistic in the sense that most groups also never establish it. It is not survivable in the sense that the outcomes speak for themselves. This one is structural, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The Walking Dead has a specific pattern across its early seasons. The group finds something that looks like safety. The prison, the farm, Alexandria. They establish themselves. Something bad happens. They lose it. And instead of moving on cleanly, they are pulled back literally or emotionally to the thing they lost. This is not a writing problem. It is a very accurate portrait of a psychological process called loss aversion, the tendency to weight what we stand to lose more heavily than what we might gain. It was identified by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, and it is one of the most well-documented patterns in human decision-making. In normal life, loss aversion is mostly harmless. In a survival situation, it can be fatal. The group that cannot fully abandon a compromised position because of what they built there is not making a tactical assessment. They are responding to a psychological pull that evolved in a completely different environment. There is a famous study where researchers gave participants a mug and then offered to trade it for something of objectively equivalent value. Most people refused. They had owned the mug for 10 minutes. They did not want to give it up. Now scale that instinct up to a community you built, friends you buried there, a place that felt like home for the first time since everything ended. The pull is not weakness. It is predictable human psychology operating exactly as designed in an environment where the design is trying to kill you. What the research on disaster survival actually shows is that the groups who move on cleanly, who abandon a compromised position fully rather than partially, share one specific habit. They conduct what psychologists call a deliberate closure, a formal, brief acknowledgement of what is being left behind, shared by the group with an explicit forward statement of where they are going and why. This sounds almost ceremonial, and in a sense, it is. The reason it works is that loss aversion is largely driven by unfinished emotional business, the sense that leaving is somehow a betrayal of what was built there or of the people who died there. The deliberate closure addresses that directly. It does not make the grief go away, it gives the group permission to move. The Walking Dead group almost never does this. They flee, or they are forced out, or they leave under fire. The emotional account never gets settled, so they carry it forward into the next decision and the one after that, and the loss aversion compounds. The groups in the historical record that survive long-term collapse events share one trait that the Walking Dead group consistently struggles with: the ability to cut losses cleanly and move. Not easily, not without grief, but completely. The Walking Dead has a lot of conversations, long ones, emotional ones, conversations about what kind of people they want to be, what the right thing to do is, who should make the decision, whether the decision that was already made was the right one. These conversations happen in barns, in prison cells, in the middle of fields, occasionally while zombies are somewhere nearby being patient. High-stakes group discussion is not inherently a problem. The problem is timing. And the show consistently places these conversations in moments where the group should be doing something other than talking. The research term for this is analysis paralysis, the state where a group has enough information to act but cannot reach a decision because the decision-making process itself has become the focus. It is extremely common in groups under stress, and for a specific reason. Making a decision means accepting responsibility for the outcome. As long as the conversation is still happening, no one has to own what comes next. There is a related problem the show documents very accurately without seeming to know it. The loudest voice in the room is almost never the best qualified one. In group discussions under stress, the person most willing to speak with total confidence tends to dominate, regardless of whether their confidence is based on actual information. Rick does this. Shane does this. Megan does this extremely well. The people in the room who actually have the best read on the situation are frequently the ones saying the least. The fix, according to researchers who study group decision-making in emergency services and the military, is simple and almost never implemented. Decisions get made by the person most qualified to make that specific type of decision, on a pre-agreed schedule with a pre-agreed time limit. Not the loudest person. Not the person who has been a leader the longest. The person whose skills are most relevant to this specific problem, making the call within a defined window. Here's what that looks like in practice, because pre-agreed protocols can sound like corporate management language, and I want to be clear that it is not complicated. You decide in advance, when things are calm. If the immediate threat is physical, this person calls it. If the question is supplies or resources, this person calls it. If the question is whether to move or stay, the group votes, but with a time limit and a named tiebreaker. These decisions take about 20 minutes to make when nothing is on fire. They are almost impossible to make for the first time when everything is on fire. The Walking Dead group is making these decisions for the first time every time under maximum pressure. You can watch the cost of that play out across 11 seasons. The conversations are long because nobody knows whose call it actually is. The loudest voice wins because there is no other mechanism. The same arguments recur because nothing was ever actually resolved, only interrupted by the next crisis. It sounds obvious. It requires the group to have had that conversation before the crisis, which is the part almost no one does. Here's what I want you to take from this. The Walking Dead is not a survival guide. It was never trying to be one. It is a story about people, and it is a very good story about people. The mistakes the characters make are not writing errors. They are the reason the show is compelling. You cannot have 11 seasons of drama if everyone makes the psychologically optimal decision every time. But a lot of people have watched this show and come away with a mental model of what collapse survival looks like. That model includes a strong single leader who makes the hard calls, a moral line about not crossing certain lines, decisions made in the heat of feeling, attachment to places and things, long discussions about difficult choices. Every item on that list has a body of research behind it explaining why it is a liability rather than an asset. Not because the people who do these things are bad or weak or unprepared, because this is what human psychology does under pressure. And if you know that in advance, you can build for it. The show is also, for what it's worth, deeply unfair to zombies. We are not nearly as slow as advertised, but that is a conversation for another time. Know what kills you before it does.